As ever, I sense my enemy working his subtle powers into an otherwise powerful work. It seems he is inserting fear, attempting to overpower willpower. The fear of continuity. Not in the way that many fear it, but the fear of one who believes his work will not be taken seriously. Is this Jeff Johns' weakness?
From brilliant prose to plagiarists and liars, all journey to the sacrificial pyre. Only the worthy shall escape the fire, the rest shall fear reviewers' eyes.
Wanted, Hal Jordan is another two-part volume, the second story being Mystery of the Star Sapphire, which I'm going to save for the end of this review as it's essentially a separate story. Remember that story that was forced into Revenge of the Green Lanterns, which basically screamed, "A year passed and shit happened"? We're back into that story now. Green Lantern Hal Jordan, formerly the last person you'd expect to suffer from trauma, has post-traumatic stress disorder. Remember in the last volume, Hal was having nightmares? That was part of it. Hal, along with his squadron mates Jillian, Cowgirl Perlman, and Rocketman, spent several months as prisoners of war to a group of terrorists originally in an unknown location. Based on the events of Wanted, I'm going to amend that and say terrorists based in Russia. I know, vast tracts of uncharted land with unknown quantities of weapons of mass destruction, governed by what's left of a toppled regime in a country with half a century's history of hating and fearing the US, and there are terrorists hiding there? We open with a dream sequence as Hal relives, not for the first time, based on his narration, the day he was given his ring by his predecessor Abin Sur. Goes a little differently this time, as a stunningly drawn and well-muscled Abin proceeds to wail on Hal, claiming that he does not deserve the green ring. This, we learn, is because Hal believes he abandoned his friends when they needed him the most by flying on an important mission without bringing his power in. This is perfectly understandable when you consider that he is often told how stupid doing that is, that his inability to summon his superpowers, or even a Justice League communicator apparently, cost him and his friends several months, broken bones, and in the case of Rocketman, lifetime dreams of becoming an astronaut. As Hal awakens in a cold sweat, he has time to have a flashback of his entire captivity and escape in Green Matrix Light. That day, not surprisingly, Hal and his fellow POWs skipped their psychiatric therapy sessions to spend time recouping together at Pancho's and Gringo's. They must be flying out of Stewart. Cowgirl is particularly generous that day, and we find out the next day that she was keeping an important secret from her two cohorts. The terrorist cell they had escaped had been found, and she was part of a mission flying against it. She was captured again. That's 0 for 2, lady, and this is the first Hal and Rocketman have heard of it. Hal has had enough, and it's time for Green Lantern to tear apart half the countryside to bring her home. In the process, we see a suitably dramatic oath, including a stunning image of his charger.
Brightest day, blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. But those who worship evil's might, beware my power. Green Lantern's light.
My only nitpick here is that if you're going to be anatomically correct and show a bulge in his costume, you should at least make it flattering. Here's where the plot gets a little less straightforward, so I'm going to take some liberties here. In trying to draw our attention to Green Lantern's 1 year later status, Revenge of the Green Lantern showed Hal clashing with the Rocket Reds, a Russian superhero group attempting to follow an international treaty by keeping foreign superheroes out of their nation's borders. This has to do with the fact that the Green Lantern Corps hasn't charged him with protecting Sector 2814, with the exception of those places they would prefer other superheroes. In the same issue, Hal faced off against a bounty hunter who wished to capture him, showing little in the way of ideas as to who put the bounty on his head thanks to how many enemies Parallax made him, and was spoken ill of by the Global Guardians, an international superhero group. This was all rather crammed into a single issue whose primary purpose was to point out that Green Lantern had moved forward a year, and allowed Tomar 2 to crash and announce Revenge of the Green Lantern. Now, as Hal flies through what is apparently Russian air to get to the terrorists, the Rocket Reds interfere. Hal shrugs them off and finds the terrorists, who Cowgirl had already escaped and are subsequently murdered by the Global Guardian. Foremost of the Global Guardians attacking him is the new Crimson Fox, who in Revenge of the Green Lanterns had not only refused to join the Guardians, stating her predecessor's friendship with Green Lantern as a reason, but it was also quickly seen under some form of mind control as the Guardian's newest member. Wow, that's exhausting to spout off. It would have been nice if, any of this was in the relevant comic, instead of requiring you to have been reading the monthly series for half a year to get the point. It's as if Geoff Johns was afraid that Green Lantern fans wouldn't take this arc, or the series, seriously, so he had to pump the previous arc full of references to it to get people to read it. Which might almost be a viable strategy if any of the details I just mentioned were referenced in the comic in a way that new readers might be able to follow. When you consider how many people just do what I do and read the book in trade paperback form, this decision seems even more idiotic. It's almost as though Geoff Johns' normally genius writing was tampered with by...
an editor?
An editor? No, I mean the evil... What was I talking about again? Anyway, as Hal narrates who the Global Guardians are, it's revealed that the reason why they're being mind-controlled, I feel like I should know why I bring this up as an important issue, is that they are under the thrall of two bounty hunters, who capture Hal in time for the plot to be interrupted several times. Amen Sur, son of Abin Sur and possibly the cause of Hal's nightmares, this latter is never stated, but it is in line with its goals. To further sow dissent, we get an ad for Mysteries of the Star Sapphire, as the Star Sapphire crystal possesses some random chick, kills her boyfriend, and goes off on a quest to find... Am I spoiling anything by saying the crystal wants to make babies with Hal Jordan? We get a random cameo by the Sinestro Corps in Arkillo, and then return to the plot. The Rocket Reds catch up with Hal, freeing him from the Faceless Hunters and starting a barrage of action sequences in order to pad out the next few issues. The Justice League, who doesn't believe Hal is doing the right thing any more than they believe he murdered a group of terrorists for not answering him, remember that cry for justice, or that he belongs in a Russian prison. As a side note, for some reason Hal needs to tell us every issue how he got his powers. Amazing how relevant plot details can be left by the wayside, but his origin story needs to be repeated on a regular basis. We get introduced to members of the Justice League we may not know, like Vixen, and we get a brief appearance by Static, my whole purpose is to be as black as I can be, Shock from the cartoon. Hal and Alan Scott, the Golden Age Green Lantern, have a talk about what Hal is doing, and it's mentioned that he's more serious with Cowgirl than he ever was with Carol. Hold on. This is Hal at his purest and his most single. Remember the last arc when he got the POW medal? He soliloquized about picking up waitresses in small towns after sleeping with a girl who didn't know his name any more than he knew hers. Now all of a sudden he's obsessed. He's beyond obsessed. His preventing Crimson Fox from kissing him had nothing to do with the fact that her lips are probably as poison as poison ivy's.
Bad luck, I'm afraid. Time to die, little Robin.
It was because she wasn't Cowgirl. It's as though Geoff Johns had a lobotomy in the middle of the writing process. What's that sound? Anyway, as Hal leaves the Justice League and the Rocket Reds to duke it out, never mind bros before hoes, and rescues Cowgirl, Amen Sur invades Edwards Air Force Base, where his father's ship is being studied. Once the main plot is resolved, we see a ton of bounty hunters converge on Hal.
Bounty hunters? We don't need that scum.
All trying to take him to Darth Vader and get the bounty for themselves. Then, we get a sequence dedicated to more Batman-related fan service. Okay, we get it. Batman with a power ring would be pretty badass. But you know what's not badass? Him in a court jester suit designed to look like he put Sinestro's clothes on over the Batsuit. Finally, we get to our plot resolution. Hal and Amen Sur. Amen talks about how he grew up without a father, killed his family while crying over candy corn and listening to Love Hurts. About how he grew up without a father, became a failed criminal, and got his ass handed to him by Kyle Rayner, survived an injury that would have killed a human, and came after Hal. Hal goads Amen on, to what ends I can only speculate, unless it's because the villain taunted into shooting someone he's been hunting for years has just that much worse aim, and establishing for the audience that fear is much more of a motivating factor for Amen than willpower will ever be. John Stewart reveals himself as having been disguised as a bounty hunter. We realize that if Hal's bulge was unflattering, John Stewart's is... John takes care of the bounty hunters as Hal and Emmett slug it out in the way that action serial heroes have for centuries, or at least since the dawn of movies. Their fisticuffs are interrupted, however, as a yellow ring flies onto Amonsur's hand. Yet another yellow ring, but at least this one is relevant, and inducts him into the Sinestro Corps. Emmett undertakes several Dragon Ball Z poses before firing a final flash attack at the Green Lantern. John responds with his own green beam, but the battle is interrupted when the yellow ring declares that Stewart must come to Cord for training. The arc closes thankfully briefly. The Global Guardians are silently rehabilitated. Hal wishes he was there to protect the base from Stewart's attack, and the love interest recognizes her friend's voice for what may be the first time in comic book history. Star Sapphire shows up for the teaser panel, and Wanted, Hal Jordan is over. While at first glance this arc is a believable story about guilt, action, and resolution, a closer look reveals it to be a horrendous mess. In the attempt to tell two stories at once, Wanted pushes important scenes into earlier chapters, further diluting the story while revealing much of the other information in the form of exposition. Characters are introduced constantly, cameos make little sense in the context of the arc, and life-changing events are simply not given the time and emotional energy they claim to be worth, as though the backstory was created specifically for this arc and then spat out as quickly as possible in order to get through it. These problems don't kill the story, but they keep it from being nearly as good as it could have been. As far as I know, it's a pretty unique concept in superhero comics, not being trapped in a situation without his powers, but the aftermath and resolution. It's nice to see Hal is fallible and able to overcome that, and it's nice to see a potential love interest come into her own. Ivan Reis's art is, as usual, fantastic. Next, it's time to move on to Mystery of the Star Sapphire. Carol Ferris is flying, late for a board meeting. She's never going to get to that board meeting though, because the Star Sapphire we've been seeing pop up from here and there arrives in a blaze of terrible art. And I mean wow. I don't normally harp on about the art. When it gets really confusing or is very erratic, I'll comment, but it's usually not the main thing on my mind, unless I can't figure out what's going on in the story, like parts of No Fear. But this, Mystery of the Star Sapphire is probably the worst art I've ever imagined in a Green Lantern comic. Daniel Acuna never went on to do the art for another Green Lantern comic, which means I assume much of the feedback at the time went a little something like this.
Dear Jeff Johns and editors of Green Lantern, if Daniel Acuna ever draws another issue, cancel my subscription, and I'd like a refund for the ones he's done so far. I'll give you the books back. They're still in good condition. They look like shit, but that's your fault, not mine.
I'll try to get this over quickly, but there are enough flaws with the art here to warrant their own review. The colors clash horribly and make me abhor the very concept of a Star Sapphire. Outlines are inconsistent, from thick black lines to lines closer to the color of the surrounding area to simply not existing. This may sound like nitpicking, but the lines are thick enough to have been drawn in a dull crayon, so it's kind of extremely noticeable. Their characters are unrecognizable other than things like Cowgirl's hat. And very funny, Acuna. I see what you did there. Some of the art looks as if it's supposed to look sexy, including the bondage and the nude woman covered by the pink sparks. But the character design is so hideous, it almost turns me off sex completely. That's ignoring the gray skin, because nothing turns me on so much as the undead, except for maybe a wet toaster. And as for Travis Landum, the letterer, with art like this, the font used for Star Sapphire just reinforces the idea that the entire comic was done in crayons and watercolors.
It's all there, black and white, clear as crystal. You get nothing. You lose. Good day, sir.
As for the story, what do you expect? Hal and Cowgirl are talking, and Star Sapphire, now Carol, shows up and tries to do her thing with Hal. Nothing new here. She sees Hal is with Cowgirl and tries to possess her instead. They fight, while we get a brief lesson on what a Star Sapphire is. I'd tell you about this, but it would make you think that the comic succeeds at anything other than burning my eyeballs. Besides, I'm not there yet, but I'll imagine Sins of the Star Sapphire tells the story much better. Once the Sapphire has been defeated, the Zamarons show up, intent on enforcing their will on the Green Lantern who has defeated their Sapphire time and again. Hal fights the Zamarons, and when the Sapphire awakens again, he forces it into possessing Queen Amanoa, forcing them to flee and remove it. This, combined with Hal likening the actions of the Star Sapphires to rape, convinces the Zamarons to change the nature of their core. They create violet rings, and state the need to combat a prophecy before we see a Final Fantasy X looking room lit up with columns of green, yellow, and violet, the colors of the three types of rings we've seen in this book. I shouldn't need to tell you what I think of Mystery of the Star Sapphire. It gets a little bit done, but it takes 3 issues to do this, and it's sure as hell not worth it. The art is terrible, completely defeating the purpose of the Star Sapphires. The writing is sloppy, and its ends are obvious. No Fear had some sloppy art and sloppy retcons, but compared to Mystery of the Star Sapphire, the second half of No Fear is a masterpiece of epic proportions. Wait, I can remember No Fear, but I can't remember parts of Revenge of the Green Lanterns? Why? Who has done this to me?